Ashburton is located on the east coast of the South Island of New Zealand. It's a thriving and growing town with a population approaching 20,000. Thanks to the hours of work by many local volunteers, Ashburton now houses one of the country's best aviation museums. The collection is growing steadily, and the museum now houses over 30 individual aircraft. It must have taken the volunteers a lot of careful planning to fit these full-size aircraft into the two hangars. They even had to utilise roof space. The displays cover aviation history from its early days up into the recently modern jet aircraft. This rear porterfield, constructed in 1938, is the only aircraft I know of that was designed by a classroom of high school students. They were in Kansas City, and the design was a class project. Besides the aircraft rarities on display, the museum also shows more common types, such as the Beechcraft. As I wandered around the museum, I was intrigued to look at the different pipes and controls and attachments on the various aircraft. Now this is something, a Hawker Siddeley Harrier jump jet. It's the only example of vertical takeoff aircraft exhibited anywhere in Australasia. Aircraft such as this saw service in the Falkland Islands War. And like some of the other jets on display, this one has a dressed up mannequin in the cockpit. It gives us an indication of how cramped the cockpit conditions were. And just in case you don't understand how a jump jet works, here's a photo of the vertical takeoff. And here we have an upmarket version of the Douglas DC-3. My first ever flight was in one of these around 1959, and I still remember the steep angle of the aisle. The DC-3 revolutionised commercial transport during the 1930s and 1940s, and it played an important role during World War II in its military version. New Zealand still has a number of airworthy Harvards. They mostly appear on anniversary days and at air displays. The Steven is in very good condition. It apparently spent most of its life in storage and has very low flying hours. I still remember walking home from school. I was just a Class 1 student, and this roar went across the sky above me. I certainly jumped with surprise, but I did witness the first jet plane in New Zealand to make 2 passes over my hometown. I was one very impressed little schoolboy. The museum also displays a couple de Havilland Vampire jets. These were the first jets to be employed by the Royal New Zealand Air Force. They're always easy to recognise with their thin twin fuselage. The McDonnell Douglas Skyhawk was the mainstay of the New Zealand Air Force from 1970 for about a dozen years. And tucked away on one side of the hangar are two full-size genuine jet cockpits. And here we are looking into the cockpit of a Canberra bomber. And I think you would certainly have to do a diet to get through the entrance hatch. Whereas access into this Russian jet cockpit is much easier. I rather like this bright yellow aircraft. It's the Zilin Agri-plane, designed for top dressing, and it was built in the Czech Republic. And here is another top dresser. This is the air truck. This is an Australian plane, but the air truck was also assembled in Hamilton, New Zealand. And I rather like this glider, which has its own inbuilt engine to lift it up to gliding height. At that stage, the propeller folds back into the fuselage. But I guess having its own propulsion, it's more classed as a microlight than as a glider. And the space age is represented by this genuine space ball, which fell from a Soviet Cosmos 482 in 1972. Several of these spaceballs landed on South Island farmland. And no visit to Ashburton's Aviation Museum can be complete without inspecting the large number of model aircraft on display in wall cabinets. It is claimed that the world's first powered flight, preceding the Wright brothers, took place not far from Ashburton in a machine that looked something like this. An interesting display is this World War II Radio Shack, complete with vintage equipment. And I think this would make a good set for anyone making a movie of World War II flying. During World War II, the Ashburton airfield was a training ground for the New Zealand Air Force. And so in one corner we find a model showing Ashburton airfield as a New Zealand Air Force training ground. Pilots were trained on 50 Tiger Moths. And outside there still stands the original World War II control tower. At the end of my first visit, I'm already planning our return visit.